Hi everyone! In this video, we'll walk through Week 6 of English 2, Quarter 2. We will focus on the key content, how the lesson builds mastery, and ways students will engage in meaningful discussion. Here is our agenda. We'll start by looking at each lesson you'll cover this week. We'll move to instructional and engagement strategies that will give you ideas on how to present the lessons. Finally, we'll look at why we're on this instructional journey. Last week, the students began Unit 3, The Natural World, which explores the relationship between humans and nature. This week, they will continue reading the novel The Namesake and the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Don't forget to look over this week's additional resource links at the bottom of the IPC. Additional resources include ECRs with exemplars and additional resources for the unit. Here, you'll also notice information for literature circles, which includes student roles aligned to standards, a teacher guide, and graphic organizers for student note-taking. Literature circles are encouraged for the novel study to facilitate a collaboration and student-led discussion about a shared text. This will ultimately create a deeper understanding and critical thinking skills. The ACP window is from December 15th to 18th. Take a look over the blueprint to see the standards covered for this assessment. Blueprints can be found on Dallas Assessment's website or My Data portal. Example items can be found on School City. Now let's take a look at this week's highlights and instructional journey. This week, students will finish reading The Namesake as well as a thematically connected poem, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. This week's focus writing opportunity includes an informational ECR. This ECR includes an excerpt from the novel for students to read and respond to. This week, students will have the opportunity to discuss two rich texts utilizing the See, Think, Wonder strategy and the Talk, Read, Talk, Write discussion routine. This is a great way to gauge where students are prior to beginning their ECRs. Now let's deconstruct 5B to better understand our content. The what is right, the how tells what we are writing, which includes responses that demonstrate understanding of text, including comparing text within and across genres, and the why, so that students can respond to an increasingly challenging variety of sources that are read, heard, or viewed. Additional focus text covered this week include 6B, 4H, and 6C. The routines of reading, writing, and discussion this week will include Talk, Read, Talk, Write, the writing routine of patterns of power, and close reading as a reading and discussion routine. This week's engagement strategies will focus on modeled reading, a reading routine. Let's check out this week's instructional and engagement strategies. As a reminder to scaffold the writing prompt, you would use the Unpacking a Writing Prompt graphic organizer that is located on page 8 of the writing playbook to have students break down what the prompt is asking them to write about and create a central idea. If students need additional assistance with developing their ideas from their central idea, they would use the RACE Acer graphic organizer that was the focus in last week's video. Let's spend some time and explore how to model the Unpacking a Writing Prompt graphic organizer using the Teacher Exemplar ECR. The first step with the Unpacking a Writing Prompt graphic organizer is to unpack the prompt. The first 3 boxes will help students with the first steps of planning and catch misconceptions early. First, we will copy the prompt into the prompt box. This will provide focus for the rest of this graphic organizer. For this ECR, the prompt asks students to look at Ashok and Mr. Lapidus and how they contribute to developing the plot. Identifying the mode of writing allows students to grasp what they will need as they compose their responses. Will they need a claim or a thesis statement? In this exemplar, students are writing an informational ECR. Say to your students, let's read the prompt in the first box together. What are some keywords that stand out? Students should notice words like characterization, contribute, and explain. Students should also notice the phrase development of the plot. which should signal to them that they must talk about how the story moves along based on the actions of the two characters. Students should also notice from the prompt that they're asked to write an informational ECR. If students do not notice this, be sure to point this critical component of the prompt out to them. Students have successfully unpacked the prompt, so they can now move on to the next step, which is creating their thesis. To help students approach the next step in the writing process, consider how you can guide students in their writing through discussion and going back to their annotated text. You can ask students, how are the two characters similar? Or how did the actions of Ashok or Mr. Lapidus help the story continue? Allow students to have some time for discussion rather than you giving them the answers. Utilize student think time in student discussion to drive their responses. Now, you could have a few students share their ideas. Allowing time for discussion will help students form their opinions in a low-stakes discussion before committing to their ideas through writing. To move students into a text-based response, you could ask them, where in the text is your opinion supported? Doing so will allow you to check for comprehension of the task and get a picture of what students need additional support before moving on to the next step of finding evidence. Once students have successfully created their thesis statements, they will need to defend their thesis statements by using text evidence. When looking at the example for the first evidence and explanation, you could ask students, what are your thoughts about Ashok's views on the name Nikhil for his son? Or you can ask them, what is another way that you could explain the text evidence used? You could also spiral back to the discussion students had while considering their thesis statements. Now let's take a look at the other character. Point out to students that this example uses two pieces of evidence and explanation. You could highlight this by saying, here, you'll notice another way to plan out your ideas. Maybe you have more than one idea you would like to consider for your ECR, but you aren't sure what to use. You're not limited to just one idea, as we saw in the first example. Then, invite students to share their own ideas. How do you feel about the examples? Remind them they should have other examples in from the text. An alternative way to look over this is to have students argue for or against the two examples, proving which is the strongest example and why. Doing this can help show students that you can use the same text set but have different ideas of what proves their answer. Now that we've finished the evidence and explanation, it's time to plan the conclusion. Now that we've finished the evidence and explanation, it's time to plan the conclusion. Ask students, when we wrap up our ECRs, should we add new information or should we wrap up the ideas from our body paragraph? Guide them to see that a conclusion restates the claim in a fresh way without adding new details. Then ask, what similarities and differences do you notice between the thesis and the conclusion? Point out that the conclusion ties back to the thesis statement without adding new information. Let's take a look at some common misconceptions that students could possibly have about a couple of the texts covered this week. Students often equate theme with the main idea or topic and that it is explicitly stated. They also analyze character and plot development in isolation. To clarify this idea, it is important to explain that theme goes beyond the main idea and it includes the characters and plot. Through modeling, you can also use characters and plot to show how students determine the theme. Other instructional moves include analyzing the development of theme using graphic organizers and charts. This will also show students that characters and plot are essential to developing theme. Help make this clear, let's review the components of informational text, the purposeful structure of the ideas, and how they are arranged develop the thesis. As we read, I'll also ask guiding questions to help students analyze the organizational structure. Questions include, how is the opening of this article structured and how does the final paragraph contribute to the article as a whole? Students will also have opportunities to discuss similarities and differences of the paired texts. While students are composing an ECR, the assigned text is 5B because the response is to a literary text written in the informational mode. This designation does not change how students approach or complete the writing task. For text 5B, some misconceptions students may have is writing responses that only summarize without offering inference or interpretation. Or, if students have correct response, it may not be supported with relevant text evidence. One way to build student capacity is to ask students questions that require them to interpret and make inferences about the text they are reading. Have students backwards plan a response to an ECR prompt and look at its components. Now, let's take a look at the checks for understanding this week. After modeling how to write a thesis statement, let students talk through how Ashok and Mrs. Lapidus are similar before they start pulling evidence. That quick conversation gives them a chance to bounce ideas off each other, clarify their thinking, and even pick up on details they might have missed on their own. By the time they get back to the unpacking the prompt graphic organizer, they'll already have some solid ideas and possible evidence in mind, so the writing feels less overwhelming and more focused. After students talk about how the two characters are alike, have them resume their work unpacking the prompt with the graphic organizer and identity evidence from the novel to support their thesis. To ensure their understanding of the task, ask them directly if the evidence they chose truly supports their thesis statement. Once students identify their first piece of evidence, they will move on to the explanation part of the unpacking the prompt. To make sure their explanations show why the evidence matters, have them answer one of these questions. Why does it matter? So what? What does this mean? The editing practice focuses on correct comma usage, specifically the correct use of commas to create different sentence types. When planning for this week's lesson, remember to engage students from the start with personal questions or role-based connections. Connections like, this character reminds me of me. That tone feels like how I talk. This setting feels like my world, or challenges me to think differently. Check understanding frequently, but let mistakes surface. That's where the learning happens. Keep it relevant. Students should walk away thinking, this character reminds me of me. That tone feels like how I talk. This setting feels like my world or challenges me to think differently. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Writing allows students to show what they have learned from their reading. Oftentimes, they are given a purpose or a prompt to guide their writing. As teachers, one of our roles is to help students understand the purpose and how that purpose shapes their message. To support students' success, we guide them through a process, unpacking the writing prompt. Here's how it works using the unpacking a writing prompt template. First, students preview the prompt and then read the selection. They write down the prompt and identify the mode of writing, like informational or argumentative. They turn the prompt into a question. The answer becomes the thesis, controlling idea, or claim that focuses the essay. Next, students gather two pieces of relevant evidence from the text to support that thesis or claim. Then they explain how each piece of evidence supports their thesis or claim. Conclude the essay by rewording the thesis or claim. Finally, students revise and edit to make sure they clearly state the controlling idea, directly answer the prompt, logically organize their ideas with detail, include relevant evidence from the text, and check spelling, sentence structure, and punctuation. Have students work to personalize their response by using transition words and phrases that create a natural flow and strengthen the overall organization of their essay. By unpacking the prompt step by step, students develop clear, focused responses that truly show their learning and understanding.